Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. So what's today about? It's not our final consortium meeting, it's now our final conference. And it's an opportunity for us to bring together some of the ideas we've had about Industry 5.0, to report a bit on the project as well. You know, not all of it relates directly to 5.0, but most of it, I'll try to keep it like that. And we brought in not just academic speakers or speakers from the project, but partners as well. So you'll hear from industry, for example, so it won't just be blah, 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 academic stuff, so it should be interesting. And we've got some great insights from there. And the idea later on in the afternoon, we'll have a discussion, a panel, and we really want to take that opportunity then to really push thinking about Industry 5.0 a lot. I've been involved in the Community of Practice 5.0, and we've been sort of progressing over time with different meetings and trying to think about what 5.0 is, how we could bring policies to push it forward. And this is part of that, in a sense. It's part of that stream of events also. So it's a 5.0 event too. I'm also the first speaker, so I'm not going anywhere. So what I shall do next is say a little bit about the project, what we did and why we did it, and what we thought at the beginning and what we think now. So I'll try, as I say, try and relate most of that to 5.0. So what did we set out to do as a project? Well, this was the first one, was probably the main one. We wanted to explore the space in production where automation adds value to work, particularly artisanal and skilled work, and where it does not. You know, where should you stop automating? Where should you push it back? We went into very much in the consequences of the introduction of Industry 4.0. At the beginning of the project, we hadn't really started using the term 5.0. That came later as we steered into it. What are the implications for jobs and roles? And we were taking a systems approach. How do the effects of technology radiate out across the organisation? We didn't want to just focus on work and jobs and roles. We wanted to focus on management and managerial capabilities as well. And we wanted to support the shift from the automation mindset, which is the 4.0, to augmentation. So that was always part of the project. And of course, that's very much part of Industry 5.0 as well. And we wanted to support and preserve the cultural heritage of Europe in terms of skilled artisanal skills. In fact, one of the things that really pulled me into this project in the first place was a conversation with Stephen Baines. And he pointed out that the last person able to do gold leaf manufacturing was about to retire, and there was no apprentice. So this skill was literally about to disappear from Europe forever. And I just thought this was fascinating. I really wanted to get involved in this. And that's how I first became involved in the project, until they pushed me to the front and said, you have to run it as well, which came as a bit of a surprise, but there you go. Okay, so here we are on this space. So this is the sort of core narrative of the project. There's this story in the economic literature that you start with craft, then you start to standardize things, and then you systematize things, and then you digitalize things. So there's this sense that over time, commercial pressure makes this inevitable. But we wanted to ask, you know, in this space here, you know, is automation, is even digitalization necessary? Is it an economic good for that organization or even for a particular sector of the economy? So that's the space. Automation's possible. And one of the things I learned from this project is from working with the guys at Lancaster and TWI is extraordinary things are possible with technology. Things I didn't actually realize it was possible to do. But just because you can do it doesn't mean to say that you will or should do it. In fact, when we look back at the 90s, actually the uptake of automation's actually been quite limited. You imagine automation is everywhere. It's not, in fact. So often it doesn't seem to make sense. This was the second rationale for the project. This was actually in the proposal. So we had this idea of splitting up automation, augmentation, and the idea that at the top here, firms which are automation, no people, turn the lights out. This is where the big manufacturing firms like Ford would be, for example. We expected them to be right up here. And down here, the artisanal firms are going to be human first, and we're really not interested in digital technology or automation, but maybe we could help them look at that. That was one of the ideas of the project. So we assumed that they just put the human first, no interest in automation. And what we found very quickly was this sharp division doesn't really work. Actually, you find automation down here. In some cases, quite a lot of it. You actually find quite a lot of human first up here in many cases. So actually this idea that just because a firm is a large bureaucratic manufacturing firm with a mass-produced product, they're only going to be interested in automation, turns out not to be true. And we found some kind of ruthlessness amongst artisanal firms towards automation and getting rid of jobs. So we were very surprised by that, and that made the project all the more interesting. Okay, so one of the things we've done in this project is have a lot of meetings. So across the work packages, and particularly work package 2, I guess, we've had a lot of conversations, and increasingly towards thinking about Industry 5.0. And these are some of the conclusions that conclusions with sort of insights and thoughts that we've come to. This one I literally picked up last night from Chris Land, so it just shows the benefits of just having conversations. So what is Industry 5.0? What can we reflect on it? Well, it's a sort of techno-anxiety in the first place. It's a reaction to the very obvious environmental social consequences of 4.0 and a sense of possibly worse to come. So it's this idea that we have a kind of neoliberal economy tangled up with technology, driving us towards environmental destruction, the acceleration of work, bad work, job losses, all this sort of stuff. So it's a kind of reaction to that. Well, we have to do something, but we don't know what it is. Let's call it Industry 5.0. It's a reaction to an overly libidinal economy. It's kind of obvious that we have a sense of sort of, the economy we live in, it's fast moving, it's expanding, or at least it was, certainly when this was written, it's expanding very fast. It's all about sort of emotion and flow and excitement and fear, all of these things mixed up. So it's not necessarily a rational economy. It's an economy built on emotion and excitement and the desire to always move forward. And this is also leading us to disaster. We need to react to that. So can we see Industry 5.0 as a kind of slightly disgusted reaction in a way that says, whoa, this is not what we want. We want something different. So it's about a reaction. It's also a melancholy and romanticism over lost work. We've outsourced so much work. We're losing skills from Europe. So there's a sort of melancholia involved in it as well. It's a rose-tinted look back at the post-war shared prosperity model, the sort of American and Swedish and German model, which was so successful and which collapsed with neoliberalism. So it's a sort of retrospective as well, but probably very rose-tinted too. What we found in more practical terms, as Industry 5.0 has become more important in the project, is it's there. It exists in industry right now. Okay, so we're going to sort of challenge the idea that it's a movement between phases. It's scattered around in responsible and humanistic management, and because we're doing ethnography and we're on site, then we begin to see it, it appears before us. It's good practice in management, it's treating the workforce well, it's understanding the importance of skills. The people, the managers who are working in this way wouldn't necessarily call it Industry 5.0. There's also, of course, a set of technologies emerging that we sort of label 5.0, which are collaborative technologies, and there's certainly technologies there that make it easier for humans to collaborate with machines, and that's also seen as a part of a slightly better future for work, perhaps more engagement through technology. So that's also Industry 5.0. So as you can see, it's a bit of a mixed bag of stuff, so it's very hard to know how exactly and where to slice through it and think about it. One of the ways that I've thought about it, I've presented this previously, and this is very much the sort of the idea that it's a shift from one mindset, one economic phase to another, from 4.0, which is accelerative, escalatory, libidinal. That leads to an acceleration mindset, but it also leads, because it creates a certain sort of demand for certain sorts of technology. So the idea that technology is driving and shaping the economy is not necessarily true. Perhaps the mindset, the way of approaching work and thinking about work, it demands automation rather than augmentation. It demands surveillance technologies, demands data collected to facilitate and accelerate production. It demands augmentation and cooperative robots, but they're usually a step towards automation. So this is a particular sort of era, it's a particular sort of mindset, and it creates a certain sort of demand. So Industry 5.0 is quite different. The idea is that it harks back to that shared sustainable model, sort of shared prosperity sustainable model. Very importantly, when that model was alive and kicking after the Second World War in particular, running up to the 70s, governments supported, unions and governments supported that approach to doing things. Government was extremely important, and I think we do forget that sometimes. And they were also interested in green solutions through Robert Kennedy and the like. So this creates a very different setting, mindset, way of thinking, era, which demands very different technology. It, of course, demands augmentation. Surveillance technologies stop being interesting. You know, why would you need surveillance technologies when you trust the workforce to get on with their work because they're skilled workers and you're working together? Why would you need to surveil them? Cobots are kind of there, but you know they literally become servants. They're not trying to interact with people in ways that aren't interesting. They're just kind of there. Data collections aimed at augmenting shop floor decisions, freeing up workers, making workers kind of self-directing, and supporting coordination and collaboration between workers. So it's just a completely same technology in many respects, but just applied and thought about differently. And data collections less about speeding up production, and data collections used instead for reducing carbon footprint, for example. Okay, so these are, the point here is that these are choices. It's much the same technology, but the choices are different and they come from this mindset. Technologies don't appear out of nowhere, they respond to demand. The other thing about this, the reason I have both here, mindset and technology transition, is they're entangled with each other. You know, there's not one without the other. They react and talk to each other. So in a sense, we get the technologies that we deserve. Okay. Just want to say a little bit about some of the things that we found in the project. This is quite a short list. There's much more to talk about. Some of it relates directly to 5.0, some of it less so. So these are some of the things that we found through doing our ethnographies and working with the engineers. Innovation is always vulnerable. It's difficult. You have to battle through, actually, as somebody said yesterday. And for innovators in firms, it actually requires a huge amount of effort, and we should never overlook this. Firms actually need a lot of support to do this, and a lot of slack as well. Innovation requires knowledge that firms don't often have. It's really easy to make bad choices. And that means that, you know, the dominant technology is 4.0. So if you don't have good information, if you're not able to make really informed choices about what impact this technology is actually going to have on your firm, then 4.0 kind of remains, it becomes the default. It's an easier sell. Automation is just an easier sell than augmentation. So it becomes the path of least resistance. We've also found that technology doesn't change, it doesn't progress from one stage to another. And we observed this really early on in the project. We developed this notion, estranged mixed ecologies. What actually happens is firms have a certain set of base technologies and they bring in other technologies, and those old technologies are still there and the old skills are still there. So it's sort of additive. You pile stuff in. You have 3D printing sitting next to a lathe from, you know, made in Milwaukee in 1954, for example. So these technologies coexist with each other. They require old skills and new skills. So it's a strange mixed ecology. So there's not this like leap from the old manufacturing technologies to automation to Industry 4.0. It's kind of a nonsense. You've got to understand the whole thing is just piling up on top of each other. And that creates a real different picture when you start to think about policy, how to change things. It changes how you think about skills, for example. So this has implications, and we're gonna write a lot more about this, I'm sure. And there's actually really interesting work coming out right now as well, after we've done this, about power systems, for example. You know, the idea that we've never got rid of old energy sources, we've just added new types of energy sources. Really interesting. Okay, skills and work. One of the key things we found and we're writing about at the minute is that skills emerge within firms and across regions. So, you know, it's not just, you know, we can't rely on a model where workers are trained in a tech college or university or whatever and then are supplied to firms in the region or nationally. Actually, many workers are actually trained by the firms themselves. They emerge and come in quite strange ways, not necessarily skilled, and they get developed once they're there. So you can think about firms as ecosystems that need to support learning and training over time. They need to retain those workers. And you might then start to think about regions as performing the same function. You know, people need to start in one firm, for example, but later on they move to a more sophisticated firm once they've developed their skills. So we need to think in these terms. So we want to push back against the kind of what we call the skills supply or the skills push model and see this as a more emergent activity. We found through our observations something which runs counter to prevailing thinking at the minute. Good work is seen as work which is engaging, interesting, demanding to some extent. But we found a lot of workers who, first of all, they want to be left alone. They don't want to engage with the firm necessarily. They want to be in their cell, working, being good at what they do, and not be bothered by management's latest fad, as they probably see it. And we kind of think that's okay. And this harks back to Richard Sennett's work on the Craftsman, for example. It's a wonderful book, and these are the sort of people he's talking about. And there seems to be quite a few of them. So there's people who don't necessarily want to engage, people who want to focus on the skills, and there's people who want to do mundane work. Not everybody wants interesting work. Some people have interesting lives outside of work. So we need to account and think about that somehow. We found that craft isn't something which just disappears over time, as some kind of economists have claimed. We found craft all over the place, but kind of hidden, and this was for me, some of the nicest parts of the project. So we found workers who preferred to carry heavy components rather than put them on a hook, because they worried they'd be damaged or scratched, and this was valuable to them. So they took that effort, and it seems mundane, but it tells you something. We had manufacturers who would I think it's called chamfering, taking the edge off metal blocks to make them look better, even though these wouldn't be seen. They'd be inside the piece of equipment they were making. It was a kind of attention to quality, to detail. Workers who tidied up the wiring inside a piece of kit, which could have remained as it was, but it was tidied up. And as one of our partners said, and I know he's here today, I wonder if he'll remember saying this, I asked him why they did this sort of thing. This was kind of intriguing to me. We should be paring it down to the least cost. This is a waste of money. Why would you do this if I was a consultant? And he said, yeah, just because we can, because we like to. Well, that to me seems like Industry 5.0 as well. That's a kind of care and attention. It's making the firm, and clearly the firm has to support that way of thinking. So again, that's Industry 5.0. We found the digital can add value, of course, but we found in some very interesting ways it can damage firms also. So you get very kind of slick systems coming in for gathering knowledge and for training, mixed reality, that sort of thing. But it can also end up separating workers and making learning more difficult within the firm. So you can damage what we've called the learning system within the firm. And particularly these medium-sized firms, they really depend on this system, and it's not obvious that it's being damaged. It's not obvious that you're beginning to separate workers, and it's really hard for them to see that until it begins to happen. And even when it's happening, it's not always necessarily obvious. And we found kind of humorously that introducing digital technology, we have this notion of digital technology as kind of fluid and flexible, and this is going to bring this new kind of flexible production, stuff like this. It's hugely inflexible, particularly when you're reliant on an outside vendor to update the software for you, for example. Actually, you get huge amounts of inflexibility. In fact, there was one of the case studies we had actually rejected the technology because of this. Either they learned to do it themselves, or they relied on the vendor, and that just wasn't going to work for them. Industry 5.0. So, as I've said, we do find Industry 5.0 as a practice, as a managerial practice, scattered around the firms. So perhaps what we should be asking is, well, under what conditions do 5.0 practices make sense for a firm? Where are they likely to take root? So it's not like a sort of policy initiative to push away the old ways and bring in the new ways. It's, well, how can we encourage these contexts for it to just emerge naturally, because it makes sense. And firms are never going to do it if it doesn't make sense. All the haranguing in the world is not going to change that. They're practical people. Managerial practice related to 5.0 is absolutely rooted in context. The nature and complexity of the product, the demand for skills and skills supply, changes how they think, the degree of market competition they're facing, the style of production. All of these things shape that context for 5.0, whether it's possible or whether it's not. But, and I'm going to talk about this more later, managerial values themselves are still crucial. Even in really similar contexts, we see quite different reactions. Not reactions, choices really. And it's less about managerial intent, as we called it at the beginning of the project. It's really it seems more about how managers see the firm in the first place. They can see them as patriarchies and themselves as the patriarch, and that can be positive and negative. They can also see them as their personal fiefdoms to do with whatever they want. Okay, so there's they can see them as communities. They can see them as machines to make money. Probably any number of possible sort of metaphors and ways of thinking about the firm, but these things really shape how they see the workforce, whether they trust the workforce or not, and that shapes the sort of technology which they then go on to adopt, because that technology has to make sense mindset. And I think I may be... Oh, yes, I did the slide this morning when I couldn't sleep. So we were talking a lot about ethnography and really how great ethnography has been in this project. So just need to thank the European Union for taking a chance on a sort of ethnography-driven project, and we really do think it's worked. So year-long studies using observation and interview gives insights that would just be impossible to get otherwise. Things like the firm's values, how do you see that? And it's about, unless you've been there for a while and see that the workers sense it as well. You can't do that unless you're on-site for extended periods. Working alongside the upskill engineers, so this is Lancaster, TWI, MITC, has just been fantastic because we've been right there as the problems have occurred, able to see how they're solved, see how they're engaging with different things, and then get in and support that to some extent. So that's given us data and insight that, again, just would have been impossible otherwise. I think the existence of the project has helped a lot of firms make good choices about technology. It's been a space in which they could safely try things out with support. So that's been really great for our partners and other firms who we just brought on afterwards, who are actually direct sort of paid partners. We're able to follow the challenges of implementing technologies. We're able to follow the impacts of technology on work, really see how it starts to affect the organization, grasping the subtle effects and things like 5.0 practices, and having real impacts on the firms through ongoing engagement, which is again made possible by the kind of long-term contact. So yeah, it's been great. That's me, finished. So, okay. So, I don't think Alison is round, so I guess I'm moderating. She's got a cold. So I'll literally take questions. I guess there aren't any. I mean, I've covered everything. Seriously, any questions? Got a few minutes. Yes. Can I give you the microphone so that we can hear you online as well?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Really, really interesting stuff. So I'm curious about during ethnography, during the period of ethnography.
Yeah.
And so you were nitty-gritty stuff, which is very interesting for me, and really sounds like it's a really exciting project, and I feel very honoured to be here to find out about the findings and so on. And so thank you for inviting me. And
you're very welcome.
So my curiosity then in terms of the ethnography, so in the different places where you were carrying out the work, did you? Because my curiosity in terms of the methodology, was it a sort of iterative process of identifying categories and what you were looking for, and then also because you mentioned that you brought this sort of 5.0 a little bit midway in the project in terms of a concept. So my curiosity, because this is really important heuristically and also the way methodologies work, then did you map the different kinds of things you were looking for? Because you mentioned values, and how did you identify that? And was that written into how you did the interviews and so on?
Yeah.
That's curiosity too. So thank you.
Wow. Big question. How rigorous and structured were we in doing this? Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I think we sort of covered that in an emergent way. What we did right at the beginning was to train the ethnographers. So we trained them not only in doing ethnography, but also the sort of fundamentals of innovation and technology change. The work of Stephen Barley, for example. Okay. So then we started to identify the things we were interested in, which was the roles, the changes in management, the impact of... So basically the ethnographers had, the workforce, the project workforce, they had not checklists exactly, but a list of things that they were interested, that we wanted to look at. And I think there was some regional variation as well, because there was a kind of Italian team, and there was a Sweden team, and there was a UK and Germany team. So although we were constantly having meetings sort of every 2 weeks, we'd have meetings together to discuss what we were doing and what we were finding. And then we just adjust and trim and say, well, this is really interesting. But I think the 5.0 stuff, it sort of came really towards the end of the ethnographies. And it was more that we were looking back at the data and having these discussions based on the data that we realized that what we were seeing is something that you would label as 5.0. And the other thing we found is that when you're trying to go and actively find 5.0, of course, nobody knows what you're talking about. So, yeah. Does that answer you?
that definitely does. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, 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 of course.
Really, again.
Sorry, falling down on the job.
Again, really interesting study and so much data.
That's not half of of it either. Yeah.
Just thinking about that data, and thinking about you're looking at changes in technology and you're looking at managerial practices. Can you think of different managerial ways of managing the same sort of analytically technological change and the impact of those results?
Can you clarify that a little bit for me?
Yeah, it's like what difference do managers make? I don't want to be technologically
Okay,
determinist,
sure.
but if you introduce something that's analytically seems like the same sort of technological change in two different firms, and different managerial teams respond in different ways.
Yeah.
What's the impact?
The impact, I'm sure, will be, and we've seen this in firms. The impact is that technology is just used differently. So the same technology can augment and automate. It's basically the same technology. It's how you apply it, and also just saying no, that's not interesting to us. This function is available, but why do we want to use surveillance? It's not interesting. Just because you can doesn't mean to say you do. And I've seen this in other projects as well. We use very little of the functionality of a lot of technologies. So there's a huge amount of choice as to how it's used, how it's implemented, and then used in everyday practice. And a lot of the work that went on in the firms was actually exploring how they could use the water jet cutter, for example, what they would do, what they would use it for. And kind of, responses to the CNC machine, well, okay, this is great, what exactly are we going to use it for? So, of course, that level of flexibility means that how it's shaped, how it's used is shaped completely by the workforce, but also by the kind of mindset and ethic that management have set up in the first place, the envelope within which they operate, I guess. I think there's lots of ways of describing it, but yeah, managers have a really big impact. More important than they're given credit for, I think. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I think you were.
Thank you, Chris, for this really interesting summary of a very small part of what your project was about. The thing, of course, my name is Stephen Dont. I'm the coordinator of the Bridges 5.0 project, and we got the project after you. We lost the race because you had this very nice proposal, but we were very happy that the European Commission found the extra funds and was able to give us the Bridges 5.0 project. The thing what was really striking for me was that ethnography was allowed as a method, because I've written a lot of proposals and I tried to evade anything like that. So since we have learned from you that was possible, we got the SESMIC project, in which we are using these kinds of methodologies also as a means. So I'm really happy that the European Commission is also thinking that we really need to understand what is going on the shop floors to develop a lot of information. But I do have, let's say, a small mean question that you also put to me at the end of this today. So let me put it at the beginning. There's a big meeting now in Antwerp at this moment of the business leaders of Europe. They are there to discuss what they want to get from the European Commission and how to enhance productivity. So you've looked in detail in these organizations. You help them change their technologies and those kind of things. How would you assess the productivity changes within these organizations?
I suppose for me, it really reinforced the idea that the productivity you get from a technology which is globally available. Anybody can use AI, automation you can go and buy. It's really about how you use it and implement it. And so then it comes down to, well, when does implementation work best? Well, it works best in a 5.0 context where workers are engaged, interested, where the management is responsive to the needs of operators and workers, and will adapt and change the technology to suit their needs as well. But there's that kind of mutual respect and a positive environment. Then you get what we broadly call innovation, but actually it's just good implementation. It's making the technology work. And, you know, I was talking about this yesterday, you know, after, you know, the Industrial Revolution, you know, it was Britain that developed the technologies of the Industrial Revolution, but it was later America who really showed us how to use them. So it's about implementation, yeah.
In the context of Industry 4.0 and before, the performance of the companies are, not only the performance, but also the impact of the companies, of the organizations, has been typically linked to a set of variables, more economy-oriented. And I was wondering if in the context of Industry 5.0, the variables, it affects the variables of assessing the impact and the performance of the companies. And I'm not sure if it was part of the scope of the project, but if not, did you have any insight for us? That's some conclusion you came along?
I'd have to say, in all honesty, not really. No, because we were studying the firms as was. We weren't studying levels of productivity. We could have done surveys on, you know, psychosocial safety and organizational climate. We did a little bit of that, but there was a kind of one-off sort of look at the firm to sort of get some data on them. But we didn't follow that over time. That's something we could have done, and it would have been interesting. But you know, how do you measure productivity? Well, of course, you can't measure productivity. So no, we didn't. We were interested in how Industry 4.0, how the technologies of that impacted and altered and changed firms. So we were kind of following that process rather than taking a broader view of the firm and its productivity. And although these questions are hugely important, and I think if we'd written the proposal now, you know, given the Dargy report and all of this and recent events around the world, we might have included something like that. I think anybody putting bids in now would be wise to deal with productivity directly, yeah.
Well, maybe productivity is not, I mean, productivity and maybe it could be interesting to shift from productivity to impact in a more broader sense where economic performance is a value, something to be considered. But, I mean, I didn't mean productivity strictly because...
So you mean as related more broadly to the economy?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, again, I think through our conversations and obviously the readings that we've done, you know, Industry 5.0 is the sort of economy that we want in Europe, you know, in opposition to the sort of autocratic economies of China, well, partly capitalist, partly autocratic, and the, you know, terrifying economies of being in the US and employment practices and that sort of thing, the kind of Teslas of this world. We don't want Europe to be Tesla. We want, you know, Europe to be, you know, more like Audi or Alfa Laval or, you know, good places to work, places. And also, you know, we have this huge reserve of skilled workers and with attention to quality and high quality, high value products. And we need to find a way to sustain and turn that into competitive advantage. I almost hate using that term, but yeah. So it's more sort of about economic policies, I think. Yeah. But we have no data on it. Just belief. Yes.
Thank you. Well, as a non-ethnographic specialist, my question would be for companies where there is like business consultant, so they study the company and then they give a list of sort of list of recommendations like bullet points, which are actionable, and that maybe is what the company is looking for. But in this case, ethnographic studies is more deeper and maybe more. It leaves it open to the companies to then make their own interpretation. Or would you say that there is, if necessary, if asked for, a list of bullet points of actionable items for each of the use cases in upskill?
Yeah, no, we could. Absolutely. I think there would be, I'd like to think there would be better bullet points than the bullet points a consultancy would reel out. That is just, you know, cut and paste from the last, you know, the last firm and the last firm and the last firm. So I think, yeah, we could do that. absolutely. And I think we'll have sort of some policy briefs and industry briefs that we'll be writing, so we'll be certainly doing that sort of thing in there. And then we have, not just some, as you say, great data to draw on, but also some sort of unexpected insights and some new insights as well, which I think is, which is what you get from ethnography, of course, yeah.